Hello, I'm Steve Nunn, President and CEO of the Open Group. Welcome to Toolkit Tuesday, where we highlight the various components and leading experts of the Architect's Toolkit, a collated portfolio of the most pertinent technology standards for enterprise architects. During the series, I'll be calling on a number of recognized experts who will bring their particular insights on how to most effectively use the various tools in the Architect's Toolkit. We'll have a mix of interviews, panel sessions, and pre-recorded presentations along the way. While all standards of the Open Group are designed so they can be adopted independently of one another, the greatest value for an organization can be derived when they're used in unison. The sum of the parts should be greater than the whole. In the Architect's Toolkit, we have collated a portfolio of the most pertinent ones for architects together, all in one place. For most of these tools, certification from the Open Group is also available, so practitioners can demonstrate that they have the skills required, and recruiters can take the guesswork out of the recruitment process, all backed up by our Open Badges program.
The river of architecture. In enterprise architecture, we're very familiar with considering as-is and to-be states. We do this so we can look for the gaps or the deltas between them. Indeed, we often use multiple timestamps, approximating some form of continuum. So as well as is, or the here and now, we might consider multiple to-be states like plus 6 months or plus 18 months or 3 years, depending on the organization and context, of course. Now, I could just talk about what do we mean for as is. It's always moving like a river. I could equally ask a question, what is our to-be state? Do we actually ever get there, or is it just a North Star? But I'd like to introduce the concept of what was and what was architecture. Surely to understand trajectory, you need to know where something has come from and at what velocity and what angle. But we tend to completely disregard yesterday's estate. Isn't it just as vital though for planning? I suggest that the river of architecture requires what was, as is, and to-be states.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to Toolkit Tuesday. We had a brief hiatus for a few weeks, but it's great to be back, and glad that so many of you have registered for today and attending today. So I hope you're well wherever you are in the world. We've been doing these a while now, and we've got some great editions lined up in the coming weeks. The reason we took a couple of weeks out was, some of you will know because you were there, we held an Open Group Enterprise Architecture Practitioners event, which was a hybrid event, an in-person element in London, England, and obviously virtual attendance as well. And it was a great event, and I was delighted to announce, among other things, the launch of the TOGAF standard 10th edition. So if you haven't heard about that, do go to our website and find out some more. It's an exciting development, and there's more to come. So you'll no doubt be hearing more about that from us in these events, but also do go and check it out. It's a significant development and really adds some great additional content and utility to the TOGAF standard. So, a couple of housekeeping items. Please, many of you will be familiar with the WebEx tool, but if you want to ask a question of today's guest speaker, then please use the Q&A channel for that, Q&A, not chat. And if you can't see the Q&A channel, if you look at go to the 3 dots in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen and click on those, you'll get the opportunity to click on Q&A. Please use that for asking questions. Please use the chat channel to chat amongst yourselves, say where you're joining us from. I can see that's starting up. So we love to see where you're all joining us from, because it is a very international audience here on Toolkit Tuesday, something that we enjoy very much. So that's about it for the preamble. I'm going to dive straight in because we have some great content today. We're going to be talking about automation today, and specifically automation of analytics and enterprise architecture roadmaps. And to guide us through that, we have no one more appropriate. We have Andrew Luthwaite, software consultant and support engineer of Evolution UK. So Andrew joined Evolution in 2013 and is a highly regarded consultant within the Abacus community. Abacus is a world-leading enterprise architecture solution from Evolution. He specializes in a range of VA disciplines, and he's worked closely with leading banking, insurance, and financial brands, helping organizations and teams implement and deploy successful business and IT strategies using Abacus. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Andrew, and we'll come back for Q&A. So please use the Q&A channel for any questions that you might have for Andrew. So without further ado, over to you, sir.
Very much, Steve. And yes, welcome everyone to today's Toolkit Tuesday. As Steve's mentioned, today's titles for automating analytics and enterprise architecture roadmaps. But generally, there are a couple of things to go through first, just before diving into some of the core content around today's particular topic. More so are the trends around automation. And I think automation generally is a term that hopefully most of you have come across on the call today. And it can mean different things to different people. And we've maybe heard of automation around process automation. We maybe have heard automation in line with things like AI and machine learning. But really, there are different trends within this automation space across organizations and across various industries as well. Also, keep in mind, for all of these trends, of course, none of these innovations really exist in isolation. Certainly for things like these cross-company collaboration tools that come out in terms of democratizing data, will go hand in hand with some of the other trends that we'll actually go through today in a bit more detail as well. The other one to maybe quickly mention on here around digital twins is hopefully a term that you've also come across. It's certainly not a new term. Digital twins, I guess, more stemmed from the ability to link up IoT devices on physical devices and physical machinery, let's say, within things like manufacturing industries, so that you could represent that digitally elsewhere. So it's certainly not a new trend, but it's certainly one that's gaining a lot more pace. And certainly these days, from the perspective that we come from, we might classify digital twins of the organization rather than of the actual physical object or system that we're actually looking to define. So certainly not new around physical assets, but definitely something that's interesting from an organization perspective, an enterprise perspective of building a digital twin of that particular system. Composable enterprise is maybe another term you've heard. So Gartner certainly has come up with a term which is really trying to define the way that an organization can be pieced together. More so, I think this is around the way we can actually bundle up specific digital capabilities within an organization. Really, from our perspective, we can kind of leverage that ability to, let's say, slice and dice the organization and build that within a graph database within our tool. And really, from a composable perspective, we might also think of this as driving down into things like microservices from a more of a software or technical background. But certainly from a business perspective, we'd also think of these as decomposable capabilities or processes internally as well. And I guess it wouldn't be an automation webinar without mentioning machine learning or AI in particular. So we'll be looking at some specific machine learning capabilities that exist today, and also, I guess, the way we're pushing the envelope around machine learning and AI in general as well. Just before doing that, it's probably worth giving you a quick overview of who we are as a company as well. So Evolution, the company, Abacus, the product. Like Steve said, I've been here for nearly 9 years or so now at Evolution, working with customers across various industries, various regions globally as well, and making sure that people can develop something like an EA platform within our tool, and helping customers really try to achieve specific objectives within the organization. Those objectives or use cases really span across many different industries and many different sectors, all the way from things like application portfolio management, technical debt, managing things like regulatory compliance metrics within their organization, all of which hopefully is something as an enterprise architect we will have the capability of doing. And as it mentions here, we support multiple frameworks out of the box, but I'm going to come back to that towards the end, specifically to talk about the Open Group Toolkit itself and how that can actually help leverage some of the automatic capabilities around automation within enterprise architecture. So for today, a few areas to quickly go over is going to be around streamlining data maintenance, automating the repository, looking at how we might actually move beyond just diagramming, and then how we can actually communicate this throughout the wider organization. That's a critical point I think you'll find throughout all of today's webinar, which is when we actually build content, whether it's visualizations, data points and KPIs, we have to make sure we're building that for the right stakeholder at the right time. And certainly, as you'll see, diagramming has had its place, and there is potentially a time and place for diagramming, but more so these days, we really want to be looking at the analytics side of things, looking at the metrics, and how we actually measure things within the organization. So firstly, around streamlining data maintenance, there are a couple of aspects when it comes to data maintenance. The first is most organizations that we speak to, and certainly from my experience, that data might exist in multiple systems. It's very rare that we come across an organization that uses one single system for all of their content. They're using content from suppliers like ServiceNow or Workday or content in Jira and Excel and PowerPoint and Visios. That data is strewn across the entire organization. And so what we actually want to achieve is not necessarily to go through the process of extracting that data and loading it into another tool, but more treating tools as a platform that can kind of connect these data sources together. So within Abacus, we tend to leverage the ability to connect to these other sources, whether that data is mastered in something like ServiceNow. Companies might master that data in Excel, might not always be the best way forward. However, if that is still the case, then of course we want to make sure that we can automate some of the content being brought into the tool. Again, the word that you hear very often is a single source of truth here. We want to make sure that we can leverage all data points within the organization and make that a connected model within the tool. The other key thing then comes to the maintenance of that data. So if it's coming from other systems, we can certainly integrate and automate that. But we also want to make sure that we provide data ownership across the enterprise. And that means people being involved with contributing content. So when we think of building things like application registers or technology portfolios or capability maps, we want to make sure that there are owners across that data. And we want to make sure that they then have the power to maintain that themselves. It's very likely, if we took something like an application portfolio, 80% of those attributes that we're managing might come from an external system. However, maybe 20% of those are specific to certain scenarios that are being modeled. Whether it's current states and future states that we're being modeling in Abacus, we want to make sure that people can actually directly update that content. The other thing as well around the data is it, of course, doesn't just have to be list-based views. As much as list-based views in terms of portfolios are useful, dynamic charts, dynamic visualizations, and diagrams are, of course, another great way of allowing people to control the data that they own and make sure that there's a collaborative approach to actually automating some of that input as well. Now, we might classify this as maybe a manual data maintenance. There are other areas that we should also consider. So when we look at integrations, one of the things that we really want to be emphasizing is the ability to leverage something like an API. So we're certainly not going to go through all of the intricate details of an API. However, keep in mind that the important aspect here is a read-write API. So it's useful, whatever system you're using, to be able to see what data is in that system and pull that out to be able to visualize that content. It's more important that you can then write back to that system. So certainly one of the things that we would look to provide is that read-write API, where users can actually pull data into Abacus from those external systems, leveraging external master sources, while at the same time maintaining that data within the current platform. So a two-way API is a big advantage these days for allowing communication across different systems and to allow users to actually understand that data within the product itself. Now, there are many different, let's say, languages that we can build the API on. Certainly when we think of things like .NET APIs and REST APIs, there are specific notations that we might use to bring that data in. More so, we want to make sure that we're bringing that data into a platform or a tool that can really mold itself around external sources. So not necessarily using specific structures, but making sure that we can also customize those structures dependent on the external data. Now, when we do bring all of that data into a tool, the manual maintenance approach, of course, is very useful from an ownership perspective. The integrations from other tools is also key. However, from an automating perspective, we want to really start looking at some more of the cutting edge platforms out there. Now, machine learning, again, of course, isn't something that's new within enterprise architecture. It's certainly not new across many other organizations. You know, Amazon uses it for building reviews. Hotels use it for understanding customer benefits throughout the organization. Some customers would use it for strategic pricing throughout the models that they build. And machine learning is really there to help fill in the blanks. The key thing around machine learning is to leverage existing data. So what we essentially would allow customers to do is once we bring that data into a platform, so we bring data in from external sources, maybe users are maintaining that manually, we're using the APIs, and now we want to run some kind of machine learning algorithm against that data. So it means taking the guesswork, hopefully, out of any of these blank values that might be in our system of portfolios. This is important specifically around things like application portfolio management. You know, if we take the idea that a specific application has a high criticality value and it's supporting very critical processes internally, machine learning might suggest that that particular disaster recovery for that particular application should be gold or high. And likewise, if there are applications that are owned by specific owners and are contributing towards processes run by, let's say, the HR department, then the machine learning algorithm will learn that any other applications by the same owner may likely also contribute towards that same department as well. So really, it does take the guesswork out of any of the content that you want to build, but it's also worth remembering as architects, we make the final decision. So we have to make sure that we can accept or reject some of the proposed values. So they're not set upon us. It will give us some kind of confidence score in terms of the output. And we as architects then have to evaluate those outputs to see if they're appropriate and then decide to approve or reject those as well. We're certainly kind of leading the market here to some extent on machine learning. And hopefully in the future, we will almost see entire architectures potentially being suggested through machine learning. Certainly right now, it's around the attributes and the metrics we're trying to automate, but we can certainly see how that can be pushed even further to automate specific scenarios as well. And then we have the automating analytics and diagramming and road mapping. Again, when it comes to the actual metrics within the organization, it is important to look at specific metrics. So we might think of things like total cost of ownership. We might be looking at costs aggregating up and down the model. And we might be building specific algorithms in Abacus to automate some of that work. Specifically around road mapping, we should also consider things like life cycle dates throughout the organization, because of course that's going to be important when we actually manage to build different projects or programs internally. And those road mapping capabilities are just going to extend throughout the organization as well. I mentioned at the beginning, diagramming, of course, is important as well as an enterprise architect. But hopefully from what you've seen so far, if we can actually import data and automate the data imports and data maintenance through things like machine learning, then perhaps there's no need to draw diagrams manually. We should be looking at leveraging the graph structures provided to actually have automatic visualizations that we can drill down into. And if there's ever a need to actually draw something, then we should leverage some of the automatic layout methods that are also available. So again, trying to shift the conversation away from drawing things to actually analyzing the data that we have. Now, there's always going to be a time and a need to draw things, of course. And these days, again, customers are seeing more of a need to support different types of notations outside, of course, of the very good notations that the Open Group provides. And these are notations that might be specific to a specific domain. So whether it's customers who want to build content using something like AWS libraries, those who want to build content using things like Microsoft Azure's library, there's a whole bunch of different notations out there around cloud architectures that should also be leveraged when we come to actually build these types of views. And then one of the key points, which I have mentioned at the beginning, is around how we actually integrate this data. So communication is, of course, key throughout the entire enterprise, throughout the entire organization. And we should really make sure that we can embed some of the analytics that we build and automate some of the analytics that we build into existing systems that are being used. So a lot of users might use Teams and Jira and Confluence. So make sure that we are able to dashboard that data, build a specific view for a specific stakeholder, and then embed that within those areas. Make sure that that data is filterable. Of course, when we provide a view for a stakeholder, we're providing them something that they can dynamically drill down through. So at the surface level, we have highlighted those analytics and the metrics we want to show, with the option for those users to keep drilling down through that content, collaborating with other users, actually building ownership around the data, and ultimately, like hopefully one of our customers' quotes, which you'll see, is they don't actually need to know that they're using an EA tool. I think this is an important point, and I think especially for a lot of tools, and maybe even just generally the concept, of course, of enterprise architecture, maybe less so these days in terms of the alignment between business and IT. Yeah, I think that's probably one thing that's been pushed, which is very good. But they don't need to know they're using an EA tool. You know, an EA tool should be an enabler to allow people to actually build confidence in the outputs that you're building. You know, it should be open to the entire organization. If we're building views in terms of what's the impact of this change, what's the impact of this regulation that's coming in, we need to make sure that everyone in the organization is aware of that. So move away from kind of back-end tools that may be useful for architectural style work and surface that through different types of views for different types of users. Now, importantly, of course, that leads us to different standards and frameworks that we can use from the toolkit. Specifically, there are things from TOGAF, IT for IT, and of course the general Open Group library around ORT and ORA that we can actually leverage for analytics. So TOGAF, my usual rule of thumb is search for the term. If it's there, it's obviously going to be very useful to dive into that area of the TOGAF standard. And certainly from a TOGAF perspective, we look at the different phases and we look at how we can actually perform gap analysis. So current states, future states, and how we actually manage those, evolve those, and then assess the outputs. From an IT for IT perspective, there are different performance indicators that we can use across different domains and different industries. So mean time between failures, we look at things like complexity values and reliability. These are all key from when we actually build the services that our customers are then using. And then more generally around the Open Group library, we can also think very specifically around things like risk analysis. So what's the effect of a risk? What's the likelihood? What's the impact of that risk across the entire organization? All the way from legal to applications, to technologies, to capabilities, and of course, ultimately to the service that we deliver. So take all of these individual aspects from all of these different areas within the Open Group and have combinations of them to make sure that you do have a fully automated architecture and a fully automated way of then producing roadmaps throughout the organization. Now, I appreciate, of course, all of everyone's time today on this particular session, and I hope it's been as useful as I've certainly found the previous Toolkit Tuesday sessions as well. It is worth quickly pointing out that we also have an EA Summit coming up on the 8th and 9th of June that we ourselves are hosting. And we are very fortunate to have a special guest from the Open Group, so Mark Dixon. He will essentially be presenting what's new and what's next in TOGAF Standard 10th edition. So if you wanted more information on that, please feel free to check out the website below, and certainly get in contact with me if you have any more details that you'd like to go through. But again, I do just want to thank the Open Group for giving us the opportunity to present today. And of course, with time permitting, we'll be happy to address any other questions that have come up on today's webinar.